Hi, Tianan.
Hello, hello.
Greetings, Brandon.
Greetings.
There's only one of you. We've had two recently.
Yeah, I decided I won't be sharing a screen, so
Okay.
I'll just stick with the single self. At some point, I should probably try to reboot my laptop to see if that fixes anything or upgrade things.
That's neat. I could upgrade the software, but that would require rebooting and restarting, and that seems sus. So
I just get distracted with other things. I'll get around to it eventually, but yeah, what is it? 34 days since my last reboot. I should at some point. Last time I went for over a year, and I realized that when I got that far into it, I was like, now I'm kind of nervous to reboot.
yeah.
Yeah, my workstation upstairs is at 100 days, and I'm definitely nervous to reboot it.
I don't know. I'm lost. I have a pretty old iMac that I love because it's one of the old iMacs with the giant screen, and they don't make this anymore. And I want this. I don't want to pay $1,000 billion jillion dollars for the monitor, which they want you to do if you're buying a.
You're ruining Apple's entire business model.
I know. I refuse. Let's see about this Mac. How old is this? This is a late 2014 27-inch iMac, and I love this computer.
Do you have to get the Apple screen though? You could just HDMI and put your own big monitor.
We have some like spare monitors I could probably, but I'm also kind of like part of the slow tech movement, right? Like I kept my phone. I had like a Pixel 2 for way too long. Like I kept it until it basically shattered. And because I'm like, well, it still makes phone calls. I can still make and receive cellular text messages and things like that. So I kind of
Stop being so relatable, Jory. Just stop it.
I think a lot of us here on the slow path on a lot of things.
Yeah, I mean,
I have a Pixel 2 upstairs that still gets active use.
I've got a 1 and a 3 upstairs, but I only keep it charged to make sure the battery doesn't die in case I ever want to go back.
where is my phone? I think this is a 4. Pretty sure this is a 4. I don't even know.
If you're still rocking a 4, that's impressive.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Right?
For me, the thing that breaks is one of two things. Usually the battery, but also the lack of updates.
Yeah, that ends up getting you like when you can no longer upgrade the apps and stuff that you use every day because it's not supported either.
I get nervous when I start seeing all these vulnerability reports coming out and they're saying, yeah, we fix it in all of these versions of Android, but if you got the old one, tough luck.
Tough luck. Enjoy being
having your idea. I'm liking the background.
Is your background a real background, Brandon? Or is that like your real house? Okay. I was like, wow, you have a lot of books.
Not real.
Okay.
Hopefully it makes you feel better to know that it took me months to figure that out. Because I didn't. I'm not going to ask.
I had that thought like earlier this week. I was talking to Brandon briefly yesterday, whatever. And I was like, oh, I wonder if that's a real background or not. And I didn't ask then. So
green screen means it doesn't do the weird fuzziness around your hair and things like that. It does a much better job, so it's harder to tell than
Yeah.
a lot of Zoom backgrounds.
Now you just need to pull a John and get a really expensive DSLR and use it as your webcam.
John's setup is really nice. Like he sounds amazing. Like his sound quality is so good, and then the picture quality is really good. Like he's a pro at that, at talking on the Zoom.
It's got a voice for radio.
He does have a great voice too. He could narrate an audiobook about containers. Be a bestseller.
How's it going today, Mike?
It's going well.
Until now.
Oh,
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun.
Is Daisy joining us today?
Daisy. There's a good girl.
Good. Hi, pup.
Hey, Bobby.
Oh, she's so cute. What a good dog.
Yeah. We have a visitor.
Oh, who's that?
Barley.
Barley.
Barley's a boy.
Barley and Daisy.
Yeah, my oldest son is in Hawaii.
And that's Barley is your son's pup.
Yeah.
Oh, cute.
They're acting they get along pretty good. So we're okay.
Well, Daisy's a golden, and theirs dogs are perfect. So of course,
Pretty much.
yeah, yeah.
But this one figured out how to open one of those sliding garbage can drawers.
Yeah.
Dun, dun, dun,
I'm hoping
indeed.
he didn't teach my Daisy here.
Didn't corrupt your precious perfect.
What the heck?
That's hilarious.
So it looks like a light crowd today. I only put the one item on there, which was talking about conformance test stuff because we ran out of time last week. So I figured I would throw it back on the agenda and have folks give opinions on what they thought about what should be in there and how to do it. I can throw Rom in the hot seat on this one because it is his open issue. There's like one thing in there that I was willing to do, and then there's a whole bunch of other stuff that got thrown in that list.
Baby steps.
But I'm not even sure the one thing that I wanted to do is in that list. I mean, it's kind of client expectations of registries, I guess. And talking to Josh last week, the key thing we're supposed to do is if we output stuff to JUnit, then that can get picked up by the website builder. So maybe it won't be too big of a deal to refactor a bunch of this stuff and change it around without completely breaking the website or having to completely redesign the website, but that is to be discovered at some point. But I guess other things in that list that you've got, Rom, talking about config files for configuring the test. We've got client-side test, things like that. Curious what folks think about that. I'm not positive I necessarily want to switch to a config file knowing that people call this within like GitHub Actions where it's a lot easier to pass an environment variable than a configuration file.
Yeah, that's a choice. I mean, I put in a list. You don't have to agree with all of them. You can make changes. That's fine. So the reason I said a config file is it I guess it achieves similar things. So if you want to share your whatever your setup was, and you want to publish that to your website, so you can say that here is my config file that I used to run these tests. And you can share it. You can derive from it, make modifications, and publish your own and things like that. So at least there is something in record instead of just environment variables. But again, it's I guess both are equivalent. So in terms of information.
At least right now, the output of this stuff, I can throw an example here. Drop the link for anybody who wants to look at it. There's a configuration section at the top of the conformance report that says, here are all the environment variables that were used as part of this test run. And so the details to reproduce it, I think, are there.
So one nice thing which is an improvement over that would be maybe you can namespace it. For example, under a pull test, you can say under a pull test a subtest A is this, subtest A B is this, and so on and so forth. Whereas in an environment variable, I don't know, you can probably flatten it, I guess. So
It's flat, but at the same time, I'm trying to figure out how granular we want to get, because if you don't run the test to push the content to the registry, there's a little bit we can do to test some of the pull and other stuff, but there are also tests where if you haven't done the previous steps, you can't do the later steps. And so to me, it feels much more appropriate to say, look, I'm just going to cut off all the test for either this kind of test or all the tests for this kind of data, and not try to say, for this one piece of data on this one kind of test, let me skip that one entry. I wouldn't want to skip the refers test on just certain kinds of manifest, for example. Either you're going to skip refers for everything, or you're going to skip a certain type of manifest for everything.
this is beginning to sound like we need a topological sort somewhere in terms of to capture all these dependencies. So
But am I making sense with that thought process there?
yes, I think so.
Or,
I think so. I think so.
I'm trying to think if there are any reasons to make an exception to that, to say, look, just for this one kind of manifest, if it's like a Helm chart, then I can't run this one API against it. And so I want to make some grid fashion to make a variable that I can use to turn off that one check. And it's like, I'm hoping no registries are actually going to need to do that.
I mean, the argument extends to even so. The tests are organized as setup, run a test, and tear down, right? So even the setup step can be ignored if that test is not enabled.
So in my thought process, the way I was going to revamp this thing is, you can inject into the test system, here is the image for this kind of data if you want to skip the push. But otherwise, I'm not going to have a setup, run the test, tear down for each thing. I'm going to make a single path through everything. It just says, push the content to the registry with whatever push APIs we want to test, query the APIs, pull the data, destroy the content in that order. And so there is a setup and a teardown for everything in there, but it's just as part of running all the tests in order.
Okay.
Maybe you would have to push content twice. We want to test two different kinds of deletes or something. I'm not sure, but that's kind of the thought process I was going through, was to restructure it so we don't have a separate setup for everything, because we've got a lot of boilerplate redundant code that is individually maintained for all those different individual setups. Gets pretty complicated. I'd like to dramatically simplify some of that if we can.
Okay, I think let's capture this in notes on that issue somewhere.
Do we want to talk more about testing for clients themselves? So I think we were partway through that conversation last week and we cut off a little bit.
Yeah, my thought process there, I think, is so you probably need a fully conformant registry, something that supports everything, and then you run clients against that, and that would be the way at least I'm thinking about it.
I mean, for me, the challenge there is if you've got the fully conformant registry and the client does stuff they're not supposed to do, how do you know? Like with a conformant registry, tattletale back to the test and say, hey, the client ran an API that I don't support, and so they did something wrong on their side. If the client makes assumptions they're not supposed to make, would that be something that, you know, if they incorrectly implement refers and they don't do the fallback in the refers API to pushing the tag, would a conformant registry detect that and report the client as invalid, or just say the client ran the refers API and then did whatever it did and we're done?
Sounds like there is a chain here. So the conformance tests will test the registry first, and that qualifies as a conformant registry, and then the client tests run against that registry. So that's, I think, a two-step process.
I'm just trying to figure out how to test some of these clients though, because I've heard people saying, I want to know a list of all the registries that have upgraded to 1.1 because I want to use the refers API. And I'm constantly going back to these people saying, you can use refers on any registry out there today that I know of. Quasi exception of GitLab, just because they don't let you push the artifact itself in some cases. But otherwise, most registries out there I've seen, you can push this content. And then we define the fallback of the refers API in there. And so my fear is that I don't know how we do good checks to make sure not only that they're calling the right APIs and getting the responses and doing whatever they're supposed to do there, but that they're following all the logic in the spec to do the proper fallback. If they do a tag listing and they get a link header in there, does the registry know that the client followed that link header to get all the tags in the tag listing to get the pagination right? And if the client didn't need to paginate and it saw whatever it was looking for on the first page, then maybe it could reasonably stop. And so you can't just say stopping early is bad. But there's a lot of logic in there that feels really difficult for me to test.
Okay, I think we'll cross that bridge when we get there, I guess. So that's that may be a step 2.
I've seen a fair number of people saying, how do we test clients? And
Yes, that's exactly my thought as well. So people are writing registries, I think, and I think the conformance test solves that problem. But and it may be a little bit of an easier problem. And the clients, it's a little bit tricky. I think we need a solution there as well.
it's easy enough when you know you can push the data, you can query the data, you can delete the data, and all the APIs are there. You can work with each of the APIs the way you're supposed to. That feels like an easier problem than, I don't know what this client is trying to do. I don't know what it wants to do. I don't know what its logic is. And so I have a very difficult time of knowing did it run the correct API for what it's trying to do?
Yeah, maybe I don't know. Maybe we can break that into two parts again. One is maybe we start with an API level test. So if you have an API server that is it's basically a mock registry. That's what we're going to embed there. And at least do the API level test first, and then the dependency test later. If the client push something before, how does the results look later based on some other API? So
I feel like I'm monopolizing a little bit. Mike, Tianan, either of you have thoughts on this?
I know the runtime spec struggled with this a lot in early days, where we talked about like, how can we test runtime implementations? Do we need to create like a CLI wrapper or a CLI spec so that they have a standardized interface so that we can actually test them, validate them? And the end result was effectively that everyone ran out of steam talking about it and working on it before we got anything actually implemented, because it's just too hard of a problem there. I want to say distribution spec is a slightly easier problem because you don't have to deal with the intricacies and weirdnesses of the kernel interactions of the runtime, but you still have to deal with the mismatch in capability of the clients, because client in this case might just be an API. It's not necessarily a CLI binary that implements a particular set of things. Or for example, like let's take a popular example, Go Container Registry, very popular Go library that also has a CLI binary. The CLI binary doesn't expose all of the functionality that you would need to actually test the Go Container Registry client. And if you hold the Go Container Registry client wrong, now it's doing something unexpected against a registry, even though the client itself, the API, may be compliant. Like it's hard to say whether this SDK is compliant with the distribution spec or not.
Yeah, there are a lot of clients out there. Runtimes is just like one slice of them. There's vulnerability scanners out there. There's the Crane tool out there that's just pushing and pulling content from registry to registry. Helm charts that are pushing their data up there. Got a lot of different tools doing different things to registries.
Yeah. Whereas with the server side, you can at least, like we've done, lump all of the different API endpoints into buckets and say, if a registry supports pull, it supports this bucket of operations. If it supports push, it supports this bucket of operations, and it has to. And we can test all of those and report which ones fail, and it's a lot more black and white.
Yeah, I mentioned this a little bit in the last call. I know CRY is for runtimes with Kubernetes, but there's an image service, and the image service has to perform all the operations that we would normally expect. Okay, and actually does have an integration bucket already, albeit for runtimes, but that could be a common image service that we, profess to test. And it's already open source, right? It's just one way to go, Brandon. If you wanted to have a common integration bucket, you already have one in the form of CRY tools, CRY test for networking. I'm sorry, not networking. Networking on the brain this week. But for image services, we do have a bucket for that already, and it can be expanded. And we would like the help. Or perhaps it's just that, fork it and do a different implementation of the image services. But every client's going to, as Tina said, every client's going to have their own API. So how do you do it? And that's where we ran into problems, yes. We ended up having classes of APIs that we would define and name, and we've got a spec for it, but it doesn't have an API like RunC. It doesn't have an implementation like RunC does.
For like the CRI tools, I haven't looked at it, so I'm not familiar with it. Is there an API itself that the test library is calling to see?
It
does
calls
this
the
work?
CRI API. So anybody with a socket that's servicing that gRPC service, the image service under CRI. It's not a runtime service, it's an image service for just pulling an image, right? Removing that sort of thing, up, pushing it, things like that.
What's the API to test Crane? All the fuse is just blue right there in that one. That's my problem, is that I don't have as like a test harness. Like we've got all these command line tools that are out there accessing registries, Helm charts that are push and pull and stuff.
Right.
If we make a test harness, we don't have anything to necessarily call other than maybe OS calls, and someone says what OS command to run, and someone's invariably going to put rm-rf in there. But that's kind of part of the mental process that I'm going through, is we don't really have an API that says, tell this client to run this command against a registry.
First step, how do I connect? Oh, auth working group.
I mean, auth is already past that part for me. I'm much earlier in the process of saying, how do I tell the Docker command line, pull an image? And I know I can run Docker pull, or there is an actual API that can talk to the Docker engine. But now this test is specific to just the Docker engine. How do I make a test that tests all clients?
Well, and that's what I said. The CRI API, the image service, as with most image services, forked, at least conceptually, the API set for Docker, for Docker pull, right? Everybody's got the same, okay, we didn't do it differently, really. Maybe a tweak here, a tweak there, but you should be able to map the APIs as you go around. Podman, it supports Docker pull as well, right? It's the same. That's what I'm saying. Almost every client has a common set of image services. So you should be able to map them all. Gets a little harder when you on the auth and the build. But again, you're not trying to build, you just want to push tags, right?
I mean, some tools do build, some tools do run and push or pull. Some tools are just scanning content that's already up there.
Yeah. Brandon, now this is harder. What does it mean to do a distribution spec conformance test of Docker build x build?
Please don't go there.
But it's a client.
Well, that is what we're talking about, though.
I know.
We have to go there if we want to talk about this. What does that mean?
Well, yeah. For conformance.
Yeah. How do we make sure build X is conformant? Which it's not. Well, I'll say that. But yeah, how do we make sure?
Citation needed.
Yeah, citation. Wait, are you saying that we're broken with Docker schema X or something?
When they push an index that puts blobs inside the manifest field, I'm saying they're not following the spec.
They don't.
Did they change the cache finally?
The cache does that?
The cache image was non-conformant.
But Docker Hub would reject that.
Nope. Everybody put overrides in there to allow the BuildX funky manifest that they do, because they were pushing an index that had blobs inside the index.
Oh, can you send me a URL? I can bark that one. Because if that's still the case, then I'm gonna make some noise.
They may have finally fixed it, but there was a lot of back and forth on that one.
Okay, that's cool.
But yeah, that's an excellent example of like, how do we even test this? Because that's not something that you'd get from the default invocation, even if you add like -- push. Like you have to specifically request a particular set of features for it to do that. It doesn't do that by default. And so how do we how do we reconcile that with testing conformance?
I would think for conformance, you're looking for a clean path of typical, operations, not can I do something different that goes around the spec? Because the spec should always be should or may. It shouldn't be must only support these, green paths, right?
Yeah, I'm guessing the spec doesn't say explicitly anywhere that you cannot put a blob in an index, especially not the distribution spec. So is this image spec compliance or distribution spec compliance? And now it's even more complicated.
Like I said, this generated a lot of discussion when we first saw it. And all the registry operators were like, yeah, we saw that. We had to put exception cases in our rules that everything needed to be a manifest in there. Docker just plows away, makes their own spec.
Yeah, we don't replicate image rules in the distribution spec. We purposely stay away from those rules, TNN. So it's not to say that it wouldn't be interesting to have a unit bucket for images that were built, pushed, right, and pulled. And that might find what Brandon was looking at. But it should be just warnings, I think. We found additional fields. Like a blob in an index.
It all depends on the implementations out there. Some implementations might want to validate that index and say, hey, we're looking for all this content. We're recursively walking down and doing our garbage collection and mark sweep algorithms. This thing wasn't a manifest.
Then you end up with, okay, I need a OCI compliant switch on that client or an environment variable.
I specifically had to add stuff to my very I specifically had to add stuff to my very generic client to make it less generic when it's copying an index from one registry to another to say it's probably a manifest, but in these cases, it might not be a manifest. And in cases where you can't determine, try both because it's a different API that you're calling to pull a blob than a manifest.
It's just a manifest using an image tag. I'm sorry, index tag. Media type, whatever.
So that's all the can of worms that I go through when I think about this problem. That's why I'm like,
we're
I don't
getting
want to
close,
solve
by
that.
the way, to having in container D, having the mount working. We're going through a PR review right now for OCI volume types, which is at a pod level, you can mount now, right? These OCI volumes. We're getting closer to having that working.
Please don't call them OCI volumes unless you make a volume specification in the OCI. I'm really serious, Mike.
It's just a volume. In my head, you're right. Yes. I started to say OCI in quite a few places, and then change it to volume. I did. So, and it was only in the error logging, in trace logging that we were saying OCI volume. It's just another volume, and the difference. The only thing that indicates that it's an image is that in this volume it's got an image reference instead of a instead of an actual volume host path. We get the image reference, we create the host path, and then mount that.
I think it's one of those areas we were talking about, the gap between the specs, between image spec and runtime spec, where we don't have a spec in OCI right now that says, like, there is no pod spec inside of OCI. Is there a way we can standardize that or not? And I think right now we don't have a way.
but yeah, specifically Tina, there would not be a problem with, schema 2 at all, for any of these pulls and mounts. It'll work just fine.
I guess, Brandon, to your point about a pod spec, we don't technically have a container spec either in the way that most runtimes use containers. We have the lower level runtime spec, which is the building blocks that you would use to build containers and pods.
Yeah.
And it has a very, very loose, practically non-existent relationship to the image spec.
I'd say it hopefully is tighter than you would expect.
Nope. Runtime
Nope.
spec has a root FS field, and that's it. There is no direct relationship between the runtime spec and the image spec. There is a conversion document that describes how to convert
I'm
from
sorry, I
the
misunderstood what
image
you're saying.
spec
I
into
apologize.
the runtime spec. But
I
even
understand now
then,
what you're
that's
saying. Yeah,
that's
yeah. Sorry, I thought you were talking about the container spec in a pod spec in Kubernetes.
no, I'm talking about specifications in the OCI.
Yeah. Sorry, Mike. I got Kubernetes on the brain. Sorry. You said pod.
You should talk to your doctor. I
You
think
took
they've
my
got a
line,
stab
Tina.
for that.
Talk to your doctor if you have Kubernetes on your brain.
You did say pod. I swapped all my Kubernetes stuff in.
Yeah, I think it was Vincent Batts who first suggested to me that Kubernetes sounded like some kind of viral infection. Like just the name sounds like, oh, you should talk to your doctor about that.
And the abbreviation is just as bad. You have Kate's.
Yeah.
Side effects of Kate's may include
Yeah. Distribution and clustering problems with your resources. Okay. Anyways. So what do you think, Brandon, on the clients? What do you want to do? Do you want to, I mean, you could just run cry test image services and say, just for grins, it's not going to hurt. It wouldn't be, but a little bit of effort to just run that that particular cry test. Just to check if one of CryDocker-D, cryo, or container-D or hosting can work with these new registries types that and restricted registries. It would be interesting to know, if only because they're popular. And you could do the same thing on Docker and Podman. Again, if only because they're popular. And then once you've got all the most popular ones, add a couple more, right? With some kind of a boot framework to run the buckets then that they already have. Then at least at that point in time, you'd be able to say, hey, these known clients using their own integration buckets, right, work on this server, right? Just a thought. I'm trying to make it easy for you.
Sorry, I'm throwing Kate's jokes in the chat here, folks.
Oh, I need to bring the chat up.
It's a good one.
That's a hacky term.
Yeah. You have to copy and paste the whole thing because I think Zoom sees the @ sign and thinks I ended the URL.
No.
Ask it about Kubernetes. Title text to it because they're talking about making a distributed architecture and, let's solve it. And person said, I wanted to solve my problem, so I built a distributed app. Now problems have 2 I. Anything you want to share, Jory, we'll be happy to check it out when you find it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a video of my daughter. We gave her the Kubernetes for Kids book, and it's hilarious. And I took a recording of this, but because it's my kid, I'll just share it to you in Slack and delete it later. But I'll find it, and you'll get a kick out of it.
I like the little mini Legos they gave out. So they gave like Goldie and a whole bunch of them. I got the zebra upstairs. This is the advantage when someone says, does anybody want to volunteer to man the CNCF table for a little bit at Open Source Summit? And I'm like, sure. And then realize what they're giving out. I'm like, I might take a couple of
Ooh, I
those.
could use some of these.
Mini Legos. Yeah, my personal instinct looking at this was punt on the client side testing, just knowing how difficult it is and stick to what we've already been doing.
Then,
Just knowing.
then let me interject. If you plan on punting, what I'd like to do is once you're hosting one of these OCI compliant registries, we can configure the CRY image test buckets to run with that server. So and then you can, we'll be doing it anyway.
So I'm not hosting anything per se, but all the reg project that I work on the side, my little fun side registry, is very much designed to be thrown into unit test,
There
CI
you go.
pipelines, that
CI/CD,
kind of stuff.
I got it. All we need to do is inject it into and that would be, I think that would be one way to get a lot of testing.
It's got a bunch of configuration options in there that say turn off this feature, turn on this feature if you wanted to test with or without refers, that kind of stuff. So that's there. It doesn't have to be backed by disk. It can go straight to memory. So if you want to have something you can spin up, run your test against, throw away, and not have anything left over on the file system.
In memory cache, everything all set up.
Yeah.
Yep, that'll work. Yeah,
So,
usually we're relying on a Docker Hub account or some other account, and then
did Ron run away? He didn't like our conversation. Oh, he's back. Okay. Technical difficulties. Maybe he was just upset that I didn't mention Zot. Is the laptop working okay there, Ron?
Yes, now it is.
Okay. When there are only 5 of us here, if you walk away, we all notice.
Not a big problem right now, Brandon, but as we move past just the easy to do image services and into artifacts integration, that's where how do we test this is going to come up. Which registries is this expected to work on? So yeah, we'll be adding this anyway to the CRY side.
Yeah, so if you want to do that and you've got data you want to do it against, the OLA reg is designed to be backed by an OCI layout. And so you just put all your data into a directory in like a test folder and then say, serve this test folder.
There you go. I would hope that you already have one that I could copy from.
I mean, there's test data in there if you want to try it against it.
Exactly. Yeah. I figured. Okay, cool.
I wrote this specifically so I'd have something against Reg Client whenever I wanted to test that stuff. And so it's designed to have minimal dependencies, minimal overhead, just serve this stuff so you can get a unit test out there.
Yeah, my long-term goals are to merge this CRI layer and some rudimentary pod spec and some, into it with an OCI. I don't care who owns it in the end, but I'd like to see these concepts at least try to merge, if not overlap each other.
Get that bridge between image and runtime.
Yeah, exactly.
In the past, I think someone mentioned we had projects that we were trying to unify with, and so distribution was, image spec was what the Rocket project in Docker said, okay, we need to standardize the image stuff. And then we need a standardized runtime because of folks doing some of the stuff on that side, and they wanted to have an option to run C to do some of their other implementations out there. So I don't know if this needs the Kubernetes and the Docker developers and some other folks to say, hey, we need a standard that we can standardize how
If
containers
you'd like
are.
me to give you a list of whys, I can do that.
I think I understand the whys. I think the direction I'm going is the whos. And so getting some of the people that are representing the container Ds and all those other different projects that want to see a spec because they're worried about compatibility of some of the other projects out there.
Yeah. We're in the auth thing, a little just beyond auth, you start getting into areas of security. Okay, Docker has a set of default caps, right? Cryo has a different set. And Kubernetes doesn't know what they should be doing, but that they should have a security context, and they don't have a default security context. Okay, well, but we want these containers to be secure. Or do we? Do we want some to be secure and some to be, you know, migratable? These are the kinds of things that we should be defining, right? In this between stage. What does a default secure container mean in OCI? It's all over the place. And you end up with, and this is why we did OCI, right? You end up with containers that run in one place and not in another because it doesn't have the right permissions. Or, you know, the other way around. Oops, you end up with containers that can do bad things, and you don't want that to happen in your cluster, in your, you know, cloud. People need help. They don't always understand what MakeNode does. They don't know what these ops, you know. And yeah, I mean, it was a good default when you were on your own machine, but when you're in a cloud in a multi-tenant environment, you need a different set of security permissions across the entire spec for the container at the runtime when it runs in run C or run C compatible. You get my drift. We need to solve those kinds of problems too, and that's why I say, you know, maybe we don't need to have a pod spec, but we need to have at least some kind of a security context concept so they can use the default OCI security context for applications of a certain class, right? And we can have a set of different types of security context that we propose.
I like the way Tianon said it earlier. I think it's that, you know, you need a container spec.
Yeah. Yes, we sort of have one, but sort of not. It doesn't have a set of defaults or rules and regs around those defaults. We have a spec.
My impression on runtime is you get the directory and you say, here are some of the security thing, the nodes and that kind of stuff. It's very low level.
The config
it doesn't cover the higher level steps of set up the networking, set up the volume, set up all that other stuff. That's all kind of already done.
No, those devices are there, and if you're a user namespace, then it has there. Yeah, there are some ways they're just not codified in a spec.
Yes, which would be nice to do.
Yes, it would. Yeah, you brought up networking. One of those. It's just all of the isolation namespaces need further clarification, especially when you're running across various platforms. Sure, the platforms may not have the same security isolation mechanisms, but those need to be mapped so that when you're running an application in one space and then another, and they both support the same application programming language or interpretive, right? Or maybe it's build local or SWASM, whatever. At that point, it would be nice to know that it's going to run the same on both, right? Or not run if the same isolation mechanisms of that spec aren't supported in that platform.
So this sounds to me more like recommendations on how to hold the runtime spec in a secure way.
Yeah.
And less a whole new spec, because
Yes.
a whole new spec implies that you're shooting for interoperability of some new format or some new API, and we're
Yeah, I don't think we need a new
not.
config JSON. It was
Yeah.
more of it was more that higher level type of spec, like pods and contain the pod container spec, right, in Kubernetes that I was talking about.
Right, which is more like recommendations for how to set up the network namespace that you put in your runtime config.
Such that it'll remain secure in your cluster. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is a higher level. Yeah. And in some cases, even if it's just the container running local, there's probably a set of recommendations for that setup as well, right? Okay. Stuff to keep us busy.
I feel like I'm busy enough, and I'm the one person that doesn't have a day job right now. So how am I busy?
Okay, change that around. Areas where you can help me. Is that better? Everybody needs help.
I was looking back through the refactor list there and wondering, are we good scoping that significantly down and just say, for right now, let's just look at refactoring the tests themselves and all the other stuff around client-side testing and possibly even a website redesign, push all that off until later. Assuming someone wants to do it later.
Well, it depends how you refactor as well. If you, the easier you make it for me to import that into the CI/CD of Cry Tools, right? Then the easier, or other groups to be able to bring that server in. If that's
Yeah,
the let's call it the conformance registry, right? I mean, it's.
If you're just looking for a quick registry you can throw in for unit tests, feel free to take my project and use it at will. But yeah, it is very much that's yours to use, because that's exactly the way I'm using it.
Yeah, I can. You know how this will be. As soon as we have one, everybody, wait, what about mine? we did one for ORES as well. So we'll probably need a set.
Did ORES make their own registry, or did they test against like ACR distribution spec, something like that?
I think they had a specific version, right?
Yeah, I don't know if they made their own registry. And I mean, there's also SOT and some other stuff. I think I had looked at, like, do I want to spin up in a distribution itself? And
yeah,
one of the things, if your project is a Go project, you can import this directly in and spin it up inside of the Go unit test. So not a separate container at all. It's just a process that's running as a HTTP handler. And so it went very nicely inside of Go. And Jory, I will be playing those videos when I'm not talking. Which gives us like 5 minutes. Anybody else have something you want to chat about? Had a very light agenda today. I figured this one will be a good one to chat about for a bit.
My Kubernetes session was approved with Containerd, so we will be there.
Yay.
Yay.
Awesome. Yeah, it's on my to-do list to make sure you guys have a room and a setup and stuff. But I don't have an update for you yet. I imagine they won't really give me a room number or anything like that till 2 weeks before anyway. But
And it should be easier this year. They split up the days, or
I should make sure definitely that we don't,
Our
that you're
community
not,
sessions can be on one day. Yeah.
yeah, make sure you're not speaking, we're not overlapping with anybody from the communities who's giving a talk at the same time or something like that.
Yeah, mine's Friday at 3:30.
Oh, lucky you.
So
Your
they
room will be
always
filled with
put
everybody.
community on the last day, at the end, because it's usually pretty widely attended. So they're trying to keep people there.
Not this time. Your room
Yeah.
will be anybody that has a late flight and nothing else to do for a couple hours.
We were last year as well. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
I
so I
always
guess that
feel
means they probably published the whole schedule then already. Yeah,
An initial set. Yeah.
okay.
The negotiations have begun.
move us earlier.
Right.
But you're CNCF. We don't care about you guys. If you know, George, it's a combined conference between CNCF and the Kubernetes group. So there's usually co-opetition between the getting the right rooms.
Yeah, I'm doing like a thing for Open Source Summit, and we are on the afternoon of the last day. Like, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm looking forward to like the 10 people who will attend these.
It's okay if you didn't want many people there, and yet you can have a smaller, more intimate conversation.
Yeah.
Years ago, I really liked what Docker did, which was that I think by noon or something like that on the last day, they cut it off. They said, okay, we're done there. All the new talks are over there. Go enjoy lunch. That afternoon, conference is still going, but it is only replays of our most attended sessions. And so the speakers got a chance to do it a second time.
Yeah, that was cool.
And so if you had a late flight, you got to pick and choose from the cream of the crop to check out for a little bit. Otherwise, you could have checked it out the first time they gave the talk or go check the recording.
Yep. Good plan.
It's always funny though, seeing that. How do they know the most attended session like a day into the conference? Someone just picked those ahead of time, I'm sure, but
historical references.
yeah. All right, that's all I got for this week. I will at some point here start tackling this one, but it probably will not be in for at least another week for me to start looking at it. Probably longer.
All righty. Cheers.
All right. Have a good
Bye,
one.
y'all.
Have a great weekend. Good seeing
Thanks.
everybody.
Likewise. Bye.